Hello, 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 and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and joining me this week is Scott Nelson. Scott is one of the founders of Joovv, which is a photobiomodulation device company. It sounds really complicated, but what it is this device that shines a near infrared and red light towards you. And this is one of these things where I've posted on my Instagram because I use one of these things. And I'm getting him on the podcast because people always ask me all these questions about how this stuff works. And truthfully, I don't know. So I wanted to ask Scott, and he gives us a lot of great information about the actual benefits. And this is something that I think has, if not is close to, but a really great amount of research close to the ketogenic diet. So this is something that's backed up by science, and it isn't witchcraft. It's not like I put a bunch of crystals around my bed before I do this stuff. So I've noticed benefits as far as increasing my sleep quality, reduction from pain, all these other things. So Scott is the master at this stuff. He will break it down for you. But it's something that I think that kind of pairs nicely with one of the benefits of a ketogenic diet, which is transforming your mitochondrial health, which is one of these devices can do as well. So I'll let Scott dive into it. So tune in, and I hope you enjoy the conversation I have with Scott Nelson. But before we get started, I have a huge announcement. This month of November, we have an exciting announcement. Perfect Keto bars have launched. That's right. It took me 18 months and 18 iterations to get this thing right. So I made a bar that tasted better than any bar, that has a consistency better than any other bar, and more importantly, does not change your blood sugar. This is one of the things that, or I guess mine and the team, so we tested it on ourselves. And for the entire month of November, we're doing a little promo. So if you use code KETOAnswers30, you can get 30% off a pack of bars that I guarantee you guys are going to love. So take a minute, try them out, and let me know what you think. Scott, thanks for being on the show today, my man.
Awesome. No, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate the opportunity.
So tell me a little bit about your background and why you're here. So just start kind of base level what you do day to day.
Sure. So I spent my entire career in traditional med tech, the medical device space, more specifically the cardiovascular arena. So before co-founding Joovv, I was with a couple different startups, but before that, like the big medical device companies, so Medtronic, Covidien, Boston Scientific, dealing with products like cardiovascular stents and peripheral thrombectomy catheters and blood vessels and veins and that kind of world. So very, very traditional med tech. But in 2015, my wife and then her sister purchased a red light therapy package at a local spa in Minneapolis. Saw some really good results. And then,
results for what?
So some of the results mainly related to skin health. So, some eczema issues, reduction in age spots, some stretch marks that sort of, went away. And so mainly related to skin health. And so interesting enough, we never, we never envisioned it to build a company around this, but my sister-in-law, Melissa, convinced her husband, Justin, who's an engineer, to kind of try to figure out some way that they could use this red light therapy. I'm using air quotes here for everyone listening. Some way to use this at home, right? Because going to a spa is super inconvenient, or going to any location on a consistent basis is not only inconvenient but also not overly budget friendly either. And so, without going too far, kind of down the rabbit hole, Justin used his engineering kind of superpower to build out some prototypes. I got involved at that point because of my med tech kind of commercialization background. And then we ended up, kind of through some diligence and some early prototypes, figured out that there's a few gaps in the market. One was most of the red light. Well, let me take a step back. One, we figured out there's a ton of science to support light therapy, which I'm sure we'll get into here in the conversation. In fact, I was pretty blown away personally by the sheer amount of data, published data around the therapy. But specific to products, there was a couple big things that we saw that were missing. One, most of the devices that you could buy at the time were very small, so you could only treat your face or your elbow or maybe your knee or something like that. And then most of them, not all, but most were really underpowered. And so what you ended up having to do as a user was use the product for a really long time to receive any sort of clinically relevant result from the device. And so those were like the two biggest things that we noticed. Like everything was small and everything was pretty much pretty low power, pretty underpowered. And so those were the those are the big gaps that we saw. And so, we kind of went down the, built some prototypes, identified some manufacturing partners, to really design a product around those two core needs: size, or treatment area, and then power.
Got it. And so to give people more background about what your product is and what you're doing is, this is the thing too, we're like, whenever I post about it on social media, people are like, oh, that's bullshit. It's just a red light. It doesn't actually do anything. And so, I mean, how is it? I mean, just one, explain you as a product for people who aren't aware of it. And then two, how do you get over that hump of skepticism?
Yeah. We went really quick into why we're even having this conversation, right? But it's a cool story if anyone's into kind of the startup world. But like for your, and I'm sure most some of the people here that are listening to us are kind of into that stuff. But red light therapy, right? It sounds super woo woo. You maybe seen some images on social. I was in the same place, 3 years ago. I thought the very same thing. I mean, like I mentioned, I was into like very conservative traditional med tech stuff that you need interventional cardiologists and radiologists and neurointerventionalists, et cetera. Like those are the people that that was my world. And so red light therapy seems super woo woo. I was very, very skeptical. But just like most people that are kind of like want to learn more, like I went straight to PubMed. Like what does the data say? What does the peer reviewed published data say? And I quickly figured out that it was overwhelmingly convincing that light therapy, or the technical term for it is photobiomodulation. That's how most academics refer to it. It's supported. It's very, very clear that it not only works, but the results are very, very wide ranging. And to be a little bit more specific, continuous wave light therapy, which our devices deliver continuous waves, so not pulsed, but continuous wave light therapy is supported by over 200 double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. So that's kind of like the gold standard in clinical data. Those are very, very well-structured studies, and there's over 200 of them that support these wavelengths of light. So the science is there if you're willing to give it an honest look. And the benefits are super wide-ranging. So it's everything from skin health, like we just talked about. The benefits are very, very clear in that arena, but also muscle recovery, joint pain, enhanced cognitive function, enhanced peak performance, from an athletic training standpoint, increased libido, et cetera. It almost sounds too good to be true, like a late night QVC commercial. But the cool thing about this, the world of light therapy, is nearly every single claim that I mentioned, not nearly every single claim that I mentioned, is supported by peer reviewed research.
Yeah, and so more actually than a ketogenic diet, which I find hilarious. That so many people will come to me about that and are doing it, and they see these results. I think that one of the things that might be tough for you guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when people try a ketogenic diet, they have a feedback loop that's pretty instantaneous. They feel way better from an energy standpoint. They maybe lose a lot of weight. They have these overt health changes. But I think that a lot of the stuff that you're talking about as far as benefits, hard to really understand or have a clear feedback of, oh, I used this red light therapy and I had this result. This biophotomodulation led to this discrete thing in my health.
Yeah, you got it. That's sort of one of the hurdles that we have to cross as a company, is that longer feedback loop. There is a segment of people, fast responders or early responders that do notice benefits almost immediately with the therapy. I would say that's a minority. That's definitely a lower percentage. Most people have to give it an honest take. It's one of the reasons we incorporated a 60-day trial with our products from the very outset. Is we felt that confident in the science, but we wanted people to be able to give it an honest shot. And if they didn't like it and they didn't experience the benefits that we were sort of educating them around, they can just return it, no questions asked, for a refund. But yeah, you're exactly right. It does take a little bit longer, but it's different based on what you're kind of using the device for. So something like skin health, most of the time you're going to need probably a solid 4 weeks to notice significant results. Some of that, to be fair, is because we look at ourselves in the mirror every day, so it's hard to notice those subtle changes. But on the flip side, some elite athletes, Olympic athletes that are using our devices, notice benefits, within a few days, if not, a week or so. And they're typically, really, really in tune with their body. And anecdotally, one story I'd share is we were fortunate to be involved with Charles Poliquin, or the late Charles Poliquin. He's kind of a well-known strength trainer, kind of elite strength trainer. We participated in his kind of grand opening of his new training center in Colorado Springs. This was earlier this fall. We're recording in late 2018 here, but he had a couple gold medalists there with him, and they noticed the benefits of, and they were speaking at his event, and they noticed the benefits of red light therapy so much that they wanted to get a quick session in before they even spoke on stage, because they noticed this and some of this is a little bit hard to quantify, but they noticed the clarity of thought, the relaxation, the calming of nerves that come with photobiomodulation. And so, some people like that, they notice things, very, very quickly. But you're right, the feedback loop does tend to be a little bit longer for most people.
And how do you resolve the initial skepticism of like, oh, if it were that good and there was that much research, why isn't everybody doing it? Like, you guys seem to be the only company that has really popularized this stuff. I don't know of any other companies, and maybe they just suck at marketing, and I've never seen them before. But what about that as far as, and I think that ketogenic diet was like this a lot in the beginning too, because there's so many benefits, especially now that are coming out with research. But when I started getting people into it 5-6 years ago, I was like, oh, if it was that simple, why wouldn't everybody be doing that? And why wouldn't my doctor be recommending that? And like, how do you get over that hurdle?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So like, why now? Why does it seem like there's sort of a surgence around a resurgence? I'm not even sure if I'd say resurgence. Just the awareness of light therapy is sort of been sort of seems like it's all over the place now, right? At least within kind of our circles. Great question. I think it's kind of a combination of maybe two things. One thing is that I'm not sure why. There's some companies in the space that have been around for a long time, much longer than we have by by a long shot. But I don't know why they've never really approached maybe the market like we have. So light therapy has definitely been around a while. I would say LED based therapy is a little bit more new. Most of the clinical research around LED based therapy versus lasers has kind of come to the forefront maybe in the late 90s to early 2000s. But yeah, so I would say, I guess to answer your question, kind of come full circle on that question is, the science is there if someone is willing to do some diligence. And I would like to think that we've done a halfway decent job of making education kind of one of our primary goals as a company, is really trying to raise awareness around the science of light therapy and the clinically proven benefits, and try to do our best to lower that skepticism hurdle, so to speak, for most people. So I think it's probably kind of a two-pronged sort of answer, if you will. But one of the things that's interesting though is, like, when I was at Medtronic, I should say when I was at Covidien, this was before Medtronic acquired Covidien, but Ardian was a company that was one of the first companies to introduce renal denervation, which is it's an ablation technique to denervate renal arteries, and there is the evidence for that type of therapy had been around since like the early to mid 20th century, and no company had really done much with the evidence. And there was a couple really kind of entrepreneurial med tech guys that like did some went deep kind of in some clinical data and said, hey, there's something here, built some prototypes. And so not too dissimilar to other kind of health tech med tech stories. If someone's willing to do a little diligence, and the science is actually there to support sort of the hypothesis, if you do things right, I think the fruit it'll bear some fruit.
Right. And so what was the first technology? Like, why was this even studied in the first place? Like, how did that become a thing that people are like, oh yeah, there's some light here, and I figured that it might have some impact on health, so I'm going to do a study about it. Like, what was the background there? How do we figure out that this is even a beneficial thing to do?
Yeah, well, like the concept of using light to heal something or to treat something has been around for quite some time, for centuries. The Europeans, there's a lot of actually research dating back to especially Eastern Europe. There's a fair amount of legacy sort of data that the Soviets have and have published with respect to light therapy, but it's still in dating back to even 50, 60 years ago. Oftentimes the concept of heliotherapy or this kind of light therapy was referred to as heliotherapy, and ironically in the early 20th century, a lot of hospitals actually used to wheel patients out into the sun as a form of therapy, as a form of healing. And so this kind of concept of using light to treat something or to heal something has been around for quite some time. But dating kind of the mid 20th century, so like the mid 1950s to kind of the late 20th century, most of the clinical research was focused on the use of lasers to deliver wavelengths of light at certain power outputs. That used to kind of be the only way to deliver a significant enough power. But with the advancements in LED technology, especially over the past 20 years, you can do a lot more now. To be more specific, with LEDs, you can deliver a very narrow band of wavelengths, which is really important when it comes to the science of the stuff that we're talking about. But the other kind of cool things that you can do with LEDs is that you can deliver them over a much broader surface area, so you can treat much larger parts of your body, and you can also deliver, in some instances, close to laser-like power. And so you can do, at the end of the day, you can do a lot more with LEDs now. And some of the early research actually was on LED-based light therapy was actually done by NASA. They wanted to study plant, whether or not you could grow plants in space. And what they ended up realizing is that these wavelengths of light delivered through LEDs is actually beneficial for astronauts in space too. And so that led to actually some early funding for LED-based devices in, I believe it was the early 2000s, that kind of time frame. And so since then, there's been a lot more focus kind of in traditional kind of like the niche of photomedicine around using LED-based therapy. In fact, there's a new acronym called PBM. Is it PBM? What is it? Is it LEDP, something like that, where it's in essence, it's the concept of specifically calling out that, this photobiomodulation therapy was delivered by LEDs instead of lasers.
Got it. And so as far as the wavelengths go, and if it's a red light versus a not, doesn't emit any light, can you explain a little bit of that background is for people who have no idea? Because I still don't really have a good idea.
Yeah. So there's different. The spectrum of light is really, really broad. So everything from visible light that that everyone can see to invisible light, and oftentimes those wavelengths of light are measured in nanometers. Sometimes or most often the acronym or the short version of nanometers is nm. And so that's kind of just like you'd measure protein in grams, et cetera, you measure light typically in nanometers, in that's sort of like the kind of the gold standard way to measure light. And so, I guess that what I would to kind of come full circle on that is the spectrum is really broad, but most of the clinical research around light therapy or using light as a therapy really falls into a very narrow spectrum, actually from about 600 nanometers to about 1,000 nanometers. And that may seem kind of broad initially, but to give you a little bit better take, the infrared spectrum, which is just one of many spectrums within the entire range, the infrared spectrum is anywhere from about 1,000 nanometers out to 20,000 nanometers. And so the light spectrum is really, really broad. And so this narrow range from about 600 nanometers to about 1,000, that's where most of the clinical science that's where most of the clinical science is focused on, is that range, and really more specifically red and then near infrared within that range. So red light in kind of the mid 600 nanometer range, and then near infrared. So not far, but near infrared in kind of the mid 800 nanometer range. And that's where, not to say that other wavelengths and that we'll learn more about how other wavelengths impact our body in the coming years, but the overwhelming amount of clinical research supports those two ranges. And so
you guys have both the near infrared and red light in your devices, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep. And so like, I guess understanding that wavelengths and what wavelengths are delivered from a device, that's really important, because it's kind of like, it's kind of like, grabbing a food product off the shelf and not there not being any label around the macronutrient
no
content,
ingredients,
right?
no nutrition facts panel, nothing.
Exactly. And so you want to understand like what wavelengths of light are delivered from a therapeutic device, and the difference between red and the near. The mechanism of action is the same at a cellular level, but the major difference is depth of penetration. So red light is readily absorbed in the dermis and epidermis of your skin, whereas near infrared light has the unique ability to penetrate deeper. And so near infrared light is a little bit better for deeper tissue treatment like muscle recovering and joint pain and things like that.
So how does this differ from, let's say, an infrared sauna where people have, I think, usually a combination of far, mid, and near infrared, correct? Because I don't think I know of any saunas, for example, that have red light in them.
Yep.
So what's the difference with that?
Yeah, so both great therapies, sauna or heat-based therapy versus photobiomodulation.
So they're just different.
Very different. It's kind of like the analogy I like to use is think about like, most people are familiar with like weight-based training and then cardiovascular training, right? Typically, you don't go run, go for a jog or a run while you're lifting, doing bicep curls, right? You don't really do. It's kind of they're different, right? They're both good. Ideally, you want a little bit of both. But they're different. They're different forms of therapy. So saunas are great. The goal of a sauna is to induce heat stress. And so that's why far infrared, mid and far infrared wavelengths are often used in saunas, is because you want to actually heat up your body. You're trying to induce heat stress on your body. So that's the mechanism of action is just different. Whereas light therapy, you're actually delivering very specific wavelengths of light that have that can induce a certain action within the mitochondria of our cells to produce more energy. So like light therapy, like the basis or the kind of the high level concept is you're helping your cells produce more energy, whereas saunas, you're actually inducing heat stress and then allowing your body to respond to that. Similar to like, it's very similar to cardiovascular exercise, quite honestly, when you look at the clinical data. So both great, just very different.
Okay. And so when some of the saunas have the near infrared light, whereas you said your device also has that, for example, does that mean like you might get a little bit of those benefits, but because you're not pairing it with the red for like you might miss out on some of the skin benefits, and maybe it's not like the application is as much as your device, or what's the difference there between near infrared applications?
Yeah. So this concept of like a near infrared sauna it's not it's kind of it's an odd statement to be quite honest, because near infrared wavelengths don't produce heat, right? So they're not really useful for the purposes of a sauna. You want to produce heat, and so a near in like there's some sauna companies that will use these infrared heat lamps, right? And with the claim that it's a near infrared sauna. Well, that's not really accurate, because those infrared heat lamps, they deliver the reason they heat up and they're so hot to the touch is because two things. One is they deliver actually a pretty broad range of wavelengths. Like the bell curve on that is actually pretty broad. So you're not just delivering near infrared light. And the other thing is they're super inefficient. So they generate a fair amount of heat, but not necessarily a fair amount of irradiance. And irradiance is like horsepower of a car, right? When it comes to light therapy, you want to know, if you're using something for the purposes of photobiomodulation or light therapy, you want to know how much total power output is generated from this device oftentimes in the form of irradiance, and that will allow you that will tell you how long you need to use it to receive a clinically relevant result. And so that's why this concept of like a near infrared sauna doesn't really quite honestly doesn't really make sense, because near infrared wavelength, if something was delivering true near infrared wavelengths, it wouldn't really get that hot. So saunas, if it's delivering mid and far infrared, great. But light therapy is completely different. A good light therapy device is not really going to get that hot.
Got it. Interesting. And so one of the things you mentioned was the effect on mitochondria. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show, is because this seems to be one of the technologies that, like, so easy to do. Like, you just sit in front of it. Like, you don't have to do anything. Whereas a lot of times where I think people benefit from exercise, from fasting, and from a ketogenic diet is most people have really messed up mitochondria. And so if people don't know, listening to the show, mitochondria are essentially like the little powerhouses in your body, in your cells. And so in the mitochondria, you produce the ATP, which is basically the energy currency at which your which your entire body runs on. And so what can happen is that those mitochondria can become dysfunctional or not really work that well. And what can happen on a ketogenic diet is you start incorporating different type of fuel sources. The ketones can get in your mitochondria and produce ATP way easier than can glucose through a lot of different mechanisms. Carbohydrates can break down. There can be certain enzymes like pyruvate dehydrogenase can clog things up. Ketones kind of bypass that and provide an alternate fuel source so that damaged mitochondria can be replaced or be healed or use energy in a certain way. And exercise is the same way, where exercising is a stress in the body. If you have dysfunctional mitochondria, you can bust those up, eat them up, and make new ones. Same thing with fasting, the exact same mechanism. And so same thing with a lot of different nutrients that you get. However, those are all very active things that you have to do. This is one of those things where it actually radically improved from the research that I've seen as well. And I know you guys have a lot of information on your website, but you can buffer this same system by just sitting down. And this is where I think like it's almost like a why not type of thing. And like even if you don't have any sort of like overt things like, oh, I really need to improve my skin health. I think that people like this is a thing that we don't have a feedback loop on mitochondria really well. I mean, yes, you can sort of feel energy or whatever, but it's not a very clear thing of like how your cells are operating from an energetic standpoint. But this is one of the things that's like one of the main predictors of health. And so can you just speak a little bit on like how your device or the technology that you guys use in general can help with mitochondrial production?
Yeah. There's no doubt, and we hear that. We're starting to hear that term a lot more, right? Mitochondrial dysfunction, or there's something wrong with someone's mitochondria, which is leading to chronic health problems. But when it comes to light therapy, that's very, very true. And I would say actually, there's a lot of synergy between red light and ketogenic diets, which I'll speak to in a second. But yeah, when our mitochondria or our cells are under stress, whether that's from a lack of sleep, whether that's intentionally induced by exercise, whether it's stress, et cetera, the mitochondria in our cells, those powerhouses, tend to produce excess nitric oxide. And nitric oxide can be very good for us, but too much of anything in most cases can have negative consequences too. And what happens during cellular respiration, which is the way our cells produce energy, there's 4 phases. And during the 4th phase, nitric oxide tends to bind to this enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase. And cytochrome C oxidase is crucial. It's a crucial enzyme for the production of ATP or adenosine triphosphate, which is cellular energy. And so when those two things bind to each other, nitric oxide and cytochrome C oxidase, ATP production can halt at the mitochondrial level. And so that's where most of the research and most clinical researchers in photomedicine, they would say that's sort of the gold standard for the mechanism, the well understood mechanism of action for light therapy is that specific wavelengths, the wavelengths that we kind of chatted about earlier, red and then near infrared. They have they have a unique action on that enzyme, cytochrome C oxidase, and because of that, those bonds between cytochrome C oxidase and nitric oxide, those are broken, and nitric oxide is then freed up. And that's why a lot of people, when using light therapy, they experience like a vasodilation or kind of a pump. It's because of that nitric oxide release. And then at the same time, you're freeing up cytochrome C oxidase to help produce ADP or adenosine diphosphate, which is a precursor to adenosine triphosphate. And so that's where red light has that's kind of the well understood mechanism of action for red and near infrared light therapy is actually to kind of induce better cellular function during the 4th phase of cellular respiration. Now, I will throw out some caveats, and this is where I think it's really interesting with ketogenic diets too, is that there's still a lot that we don't know about the mechanism of action. One thing I'll point out is that there was some recent research published from some academics in Australia that showcased red and infrared light actually helps to induce healthy gut microbiome, which is really interesting because it shouldn't penetrate that deep into your gut, but they showcase that it actually does help in that arena. And so that their conclusion from their early work was that there's a different mechanism of action at play here, one that we don't truly fully understand. So I want to throw that out that there are some different things going on. And one of those actually is, with ketogenic diets, one of the cool things is that a ketogenic diet, especially if the food is sourced appropriately, is very low in deuterium, and deuterium is a kind of a heavy hydrogen atom, which can kind of clog up the cellular respiration process, and red light actually has a unique has a unique role in lowering deuterium levels at the cellular level too. And so there's actually some research that we're doing with a group in regards to deuterium. But a good ketogenic diet is works synergistically with red and near infrared light therapy.
And this is one of the things of I've used the unit a lot, and just to speak on some of the things that I've noticed. And as a disclaimer, this is not a paid podcast. You guys are not by this spot. You're not sponsoring the show. You're not paying me for this stuff. I'm not getting affiliate commission. Like, there's no financial incentive to do this. I've just tried it out. I was interested in it. And I got it like right before I had this really major ankle injury, and I use it all the time. And actually, it's like, of course I have no control. It's not like both my ankles were messed up in April and one of them was treated with this light therapy and one was not. And I don't know how much it affected it, but I healed really, really, really quickly. But again, who knows? I was also taking like 8 scoops of collagen a day and doing as much anti-inflammatory stuff as humanly possible. But one of the things I did notice is that pain pretty much disappeared, even when it was like excruciating, after 10 to 15 minutes of use. Has there been much research on pain gating in any of that mechanism for injuries?
Yeah, definitely. There's no doubt that, in fact, I would probably say that the sort of the biggest or the largest bases of clinical research for light therapy comes down to 3 buckets. One would be pain, pain and inflammation. The other one would be probably muscle recovery, and then 2 would be skin health. Those are probably the biggest 3. But there's no doubt. I mean, I could off the top, if I was going to shoot you an email now, I could fire off like 10 to 15 like really, really well structured clinical studies on light therapy that show that it reduces, pain. A lot of those are focused on arthritic pain, but nonetheless, it's still pain. And so, yeah, you're right. There was no control, in your little your N of 1 experience, but the clinical data definitely supports a reduction in pain when using these wavelengths of light.
One of the things that I noticed as an ancillary thing is I was using a lot at night, and this is another thing that I didn't realize until later, but it apparently also helps with sleep. So now I can test this. I have the new Oura Ring, and I'm tracking my sleep pretty intensely. And then I noticed that the nights that I have it on versus the nights that I have it off, like my deep sleep especially, is markedly different and usually maxed out on the meter. So like at the Oura Ring, you have some data on, did you get these stages of sleep, and if so, how much? And I'm not able to really max out that meter that much unless it seems I use this light machine beforehand. Is that something that's consistent with other things that you've seen?
Yeah. I would say, like, when it comes to sleep, there's some. I wouldn't say it's not nearly as robust as some of those other buckets that I mentioned when in terms of clinical research, but there's definitely some clinical studies. One I can think of right now was on a group of professional women's basketball players that definitively showed that when they used red light in the evenings, their sleep quality improved. Right. That's one off the top of my head, but yeah, there's definitely a handful of studies. I think it's pretty clear that these wavelengths of light, when used in the evenings or at night, actually help produce more melatonin, which we all know is great for better sleep quality. Anecdotally, that's probably the biggest benefit that I notice when using light therapy is when I tend to use it more in the evenings. But when I use it in the evenings, it definitely, in my opinion, definitely induces better sleep quality. And that's sort of consistent feedback we get a lot from our customers too, in that they maybe bought it for something else, right? Like muscle recovery or testosterone production or something like that. But that's sort of an ancillary benefit that they noticed is enhanced sleep quality. And it's interesting that we're even talking about this. I had a conversation the other day with Keith Norris with Paleo FX, and that's something that he noticed. Like when he's not using red light therapy as consistent as he normally does, he notices his sleep quality decreases through I can't remember. I can't remember if he's using the Aura or something else that he's using as a measurement tool. So he even mentioned it the other day in a conversation. So it's definitely consistent feedback that we get a lot, and there is a handful of clinical studies that showcase the benefits of light therapy for better sleep too.
Yeah, it's just one of these things. Again, I have to imagine that your job of marketing these things to people can be very, very difficult. As it's not like I do it and then I like want to go to sleep right away. It's not like it makes you sleepy, which is the strange part about it. Like the feedback loop again is a little far off, but my quality of sleep after I use it is dramatically different. And so it's not like you're taking some Ambien or crazy amount of magnesium and you just pass out afterwards. For me, at least, maybe some people have that effect, but for me, it's just like I would have a little shutdown routine regardless, and that's either part of it or not. And it doesn't help me fall asleep or become sleepier, but my actual quality of sleep during sleep is much different. So I don't know if you have that effect or not.
No, you're 100% right. It's not like you're gonna like taking a pre-workout supplement where all of a sudden you notice like, man, I'm getting shaky here during my workout or something like that. You're totally spot on. The overwhelming majority of people do not have like that one-to-one sort of feedback loop when using it. It's usually more over. They see like trends almost more over a period of time, I'm no, and this is usually people that are not using, diagnostic tools like the Oura Ring, for example, but they're noticed like, hey, I just went like a week without using light therapy, and man, my sleep quality over the like 4 or 5 days was like not great, And so there's those sort of like ancillary feedback loops that people notice. But you're right. I mean, it's a challenge that we have as a company, but it's a good challenge too. It's because it's like the onus is on us to figure out a way to communicate the fact that the science is there. There's a ton of science there. If you just give it a chance, right? And so it's our, it's our job to be able to communicate the science in an easily understandable way, where people will give it a legitimate shot. But it's funny, like we've had this 60-day trial in place since we initially launched our first product back in early 2016, and the number of people that take advantage of that 60-day trial where they'll return it within the 60 days because they didn't really notice the benefits they were looking for, it's extremely low. In fact, some people would argue that it's too low. Like we're not reaching a broad enough audience, with this product because it's too low. So that's one of probably the biggest surprise since we first launched is like we sort of felt like we were taking a little bit of a risk, extending that 60-day trial or extending the kind of trial period out to 60 days. But, it's a very, very low percentage of people that actually, return their product within that time frame. And I think that just speaks to the fact that if you can take the initial step is like kind of beginning to believe the science, but then if you actually give it a diligent shot, use it 3-4 times a week consistently over a month, most people are going to notice, benefit. It may not be the initial benefit they were looking for, but they'll notice like ancillary benefits, like better sleep, or, hey, man, it seems like I'm recovering faster from workouts, those kind of things.
So is this something that people need to do every single day to reach a benefit, or is it once, twice a week for how many minutes? Like what is like the, I guess, quote unquote, treatment protocol if you have one of these devices?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the way, remember those two core things that we noticed when we were, this was back, 3 years ago now when we were first doing our diligence, is that most light therapy products were too small and they were underpowered. And if it's underpowered, that means you have to use it for a really long time. And so compliance becomes really difficult. Like no one wants to use something for like an hour a day. Like no one has the time to do that on any sort of consistent basis. So we really wanted to optimize for total power output. So someone could use it like, 8-10 minutes a day and get a big enough dose where it's like, I can fit this into my schedule, 8-10 minutes a day. That's super easy. And so, so I guess to answer your question, I would say if you're using a device that delivers enough power, ideally you're using it daily, for 8, 10, 15 minutes, something like that. I would say consistency is key. So you want to be using, if not daily, 3, 4, 5 times a week. If you're only using it maybe once or twice a week, there are some clinical studies that actually do showcase some really well-structured clinical studies that showcase benefits, for participants that only were using it 2 or 3 times a week. But I'd say, if you only have to do it for 10 minutes, like try to do it daily if at all possible.
Got it. And is there a point where you have a lot of diminishing returns where like 10 minutes is great, but 12 minutes is like, a little bit better. And then 15 minutes just doesn't matter? Or is there a roll-off period like that?
there is to a certain extent. There's something called the biphasic dose response, which is kind of in essence, it's like at some point in a treatment time, you're gonna. It's not like you're gonna see negative impacts. You're just gonna see like. It's kind of Pareto's law, right? Like you're gonna see a dramatic fall off in terms of the benefits. I would say my argument that is like that the biphasic dose response is not definitively clear because of a lot of different factors, but it's not really that well understood. And just to put this in a little bit better, to use a better example, if you're in a decent latitude and you spend an hour outside in the sun, during kind of midday sun, you're going to get around 1 million joules of energy, right? So midday sun, decent latitude for an hour, you're going to get about 1 million joules of energy. With our largest device now, the Joovv Elite, it's like what a lot of professional athletes are using and whatnot. That thing will deliver about 200,000 joules of energy in 10 minutes. And so like you really have to overuse it to like experience, to see that dramatic fall off. So like most people, if they're in the sun, a halfway decent amount can be outside for an hour, and it's totally fine. Well, you'd have to use, that Joovv Elite system for like, nearly an hour, which, you're overusing it at that point. If you're using it for an hour at 6 inches away, like most people aren't going to do that. You know what I mean? So I guess my point is that you really have to be overusing something to ever kind of fall into that window where you're not really getting any sort of benefit from it.
And do you have to be that close to it? So like, for instance, if I'm in my bedroom where I have mine right now, do I have to be sitting next to it, or can I be walking around and in bed and like having the room? Because the room lights up ridiculously red.
Yeah.
And I've seen it, so my girlfriend was using it, and I was like in my backyard where with the blinds closed, it was like hilariously like red shining out, and like neighbors must think we're just two little freaks here. But yeah, I mean, is it still effective, or is it like a dose dependent thing where like the further you get away, the more time you have to have with it, and what is the?
Yep. Yeah, no. It's funny. We've got a lot we're the same way. Like our neighbors think we're kind of crazy when they see like a room lit up in all red at night. But yeah, so there's probably I'll answer that in two ways. So yeah, dosage is dependent on the distance you are from the device. So as an example, with something like let's just use that Joovv Elite system that we were just talking about. At about 6 inches from the device, it's delivering about 200,000 joules of energy, right? In the neighborhood of like 30 to 40 milliwatts per square centimeter of irradiance. If you back up to like 18 inches, that irradiance drops off dramatically. You're now going from like 30 to 40 to like maybe 5 to 10 milliwatts per square centimeter. So it does drop off dramatically. So if you want to get sort of a clinically relevant dose of energy, you need to be closer to a device. Something like ours, ideally, we generally kind of recommend that 6 inches away is kind of a good benchmark, but anywhere from kind of 3 inches to about a foot is probably pretty good. But so that's one, I guess one answer. The other kind of aspect of that answer is I myself my wife and I use our device to illuminate our room at night too, primarily because we don't want, if we're watching TV or something like that, or I'm doing whatever, I don't necessarily want to turn on artificial blue light at night, just because that's disruptive to our circadian rhythm. That's pretty well understood now. And so instead we'll use, red light, which has the opposite effect of blue light at night, to illuminate our room. And I wouldn't say that's not necessarily using it for therapeutic reasons per se, but at the same time, it kind of is, because we're not using blue light. Instead, we're using red light that's been shown to enhance melatonin production. And that's sort of a line. I mean, if you're in tune with sort of like the kind of the paleo movement or sort of ancestral living, that sort of makes sense, because the sun rises and then sets, right? When the sun rises, there's, the red and near infrared wavelengths in the sunrise are greater at that point in the day. And then at night, when the sun sets, that's why it's, it's orange, it's red on a good sunset, because of those red and near infrared wavelengths. And so it kind of makes sense to use, if you really want to like hack your day, to use this type of therapy in the morning and or the evening to kind of align with the natural sunrise and sunset.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, one of the things so I either use it in one of two ways. One, in the morning, I meditate in front of it. So I just have a little thing that I sit on, like a little, like, I don't know, floor cushion with something kind of similar. And I do like 15 to 20 minutes of meditation in front of it. It's like, it's one of these things too, where like it's so passive that you can easily stack it with other things. And so I do that in the morning, or I use it at night, like as I'm brushing my teeth and kind of winding down. And then I'll like read my Kindle in front of it for, 15 minutes or so.
Yep. No, that's the cool thing about, like, you don't really, to your point earlier, you don't really have to do much. In fact, it's great to kind of do a few other things, in front of the device. Like I'll oftentimes just throw on a podcast. A lot of times I'll try to take, a walk to get some natural light in the morning. So if I do use it in the morning, I'll just, come home, throw on a podcast, for 10 minutes and, stand in front of the, in front of the device. If I use it in the evening, I'm usually doing something else while I'm using it, which is kind of cool. But that's kind of the nice thing about light therapy. You really don't. It's really not hard. It's just kind of carving out 8-10 minutes of your day to kind of sit or stand in front of a high quality device.
Right. And so I think that one of the most important things is people having access to the information about the research. So where can people go to find more about your type of research?
Yeah. So if you kind of want to nerd out on the science a little bit, I'd go to our website, joovv.com. So it's J2O's2V's. So JOOVV.com. And in the main kind of navigation of our site, you'll see a learn page, or a learn section, I should say. And that houses like all of our kind of pretty well researched articles, just like your team and what you guys do at Perfect Keto. We are heavily invested in content and really well researched content. And so if you're kind of a science geek or nerd and want to kind of learn more about that, I'd say go there. If you kind of want to stay high level and you're like, this sounds interesting, but I don't want to learn about enzymes and cellular respiration, go to the reviews page on our site. That's kind of in the main navigation as well. And there's over 500, published reviews there that are all verified buyers. That's not, they're real people that have bought a Joovv. And you can kind of see what people say in their own words, which is and we publish all of we don't hide the negative reviews. They're all there. And so you can kind of see what people say in their own words, which is kind of cool, And so I would say, depending on which camp you fall into, those are probably the two areas that I'd go to.
Awesome, man. Anywhere else you want to point people to?
Those are probably the two spots, the two go-to spots. But if you're like, nah, Joovv, you're biased. Clearly, you sell a light therapy product. Go to PubMed. That's totally free, right? Do a couple different searches. One is LLLT, which is an acronym for low level laser therapy, or some people refer to it as low level light therapy. You'll find. In fact, you're probably going to have to narrow your search parameters a little bit, because you're going to find too many studies on using that search term. Or photobiomodulation on PubMed. You're going to want to do something specific like LLLT for muscle recovery or joint pain or arthritis or something like that. And you're going to find all kinds of published peer-reviewed research. You can spend hours and hours and hours digging into that stuff. So if you want kind of an unbiased take, go to PubMed and just give it an honest take. And I think you'll probably be surprised at how much research there really is to support this light therapy or photobiomodulation.
Sounds good, man. Well, again, this was not a paid podcast. I'm stoked about this stuff, and you're super passionate, obviously, and so it's hard to not maybe come across as a paid promotion. But I can guarantee you guys that there is no crazy affiliate linking thing going on here. There's no paid promotion. So just appreciate your time, your passion, man.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thanks for the opportunity, and really appreciate it, man. All right. Always good to chat.
Chat soon, buddy.
All right, sounds good.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.